Hi, welcome. I talk on this channel about theories to understand the universe better, to understand oneself better, and in some sense, this channel is my exploration, and hopefully, as I try to understand myself better, there are other people who can be able to be helped, and maybe what I talk about can help them understand themselves better. Today is an important, particularly important topic in relation to this. All right, there's been a lot of talk about trans, and I didn't want, I have already posted like 2 videos already talking about and that I labeled, the closest I could label myself was AGP, autogynephilia. But that doesn't really describe it. And the term either was originated or had become famous by Dr. Ray Blanchard. And he, of course, had worked from previous studies. So I think he missed the mark on some level. I'd like to clarify that. Right now, in today's climate, at least on YouTube and social media, trans has been so all-encompassing. I really want to delineate it. I want, as Dr. Blanchard had earlier tried to do, I want to delineate and make specific categories within this trans large category. All right, let's start off with my own personal experience. Dr. Blanchard he studied a prison population, which already is, I think, too limited a scope, and that may be an error in terms of studies. But he studied a prison population. He found that there were two categories: what he called the homosexual transsexuals and the autogynephiliacs. He defined, or he categorized, the autogynephiliacs as those who, well, literally the term means auto, meaning self, and gyna, referring to women, and philia, meaning I'm not sure if there's a specific difference between fetish and, I think it refers to fetish, but it's a fetish for. So literally, it's a fetish for imagining oneself as a woman. So that part, I think, in terms of myself, I think agrees more. Then there's the other category, or matches better with me. The other is homosexual transsexuals, and basically, clearly, this is someone being attracted to another member of the same sex. So there's a clear delineation, and this work was something praiseworthy, because before that, as now, the term, I don't know what they called trans at that point, but it had been so mishmashed, and people were saying, well, this is a true trans person, this is not a true trans person. And that's what prompted me to make this video now. Even though he had those two clear categories, people are still throwing around the term cross-dresser or AGP or true trans, or I really felt that I was born in the wrong body, or assigned, male at birth, or assigned female at birth, and so forth. And I just like to clear the air as far as I understand it. Okay. Dr. Blanchard characterized autogynephilia, people with autogynephilia, as, I'll just say AGPs from now on, AGPs as heterosexual, which would be the true in my case, in contrast to homosexuals, meaning they would be attracted to the opposite sex. They are so attracted to the opposite sex that they want to embody, fallen in love with that attraction and want to embody it within themselves. Okay, so far, so good. That does apply to me. Um, However, and they would tend to cross dress. I'm taking a guess that although there's some overlap, probably, that homosexual transsexuals would not tend to cross dress. It's simply more of an attraction to the same sex in terms of dating and relationships, whereas you're talking about two very different things, really. AGP, it's more like a self, an attraction, an inverse attraction, sort of, or an extraordinary. You're so heterosexual in terms of attraction to someone that you feel like an urge to embody that within yourself. Um, okay, so let me make this clear. In social media, people throw around crossdresser and AGP. First of all, crossdresser. Crossdresser is an activity. It is not meant to be a derogatory term. It is simply an act. Like I've been a crossdresser. Um, it people talk about crossdresser as though they are not as like a synonym for not being a true trans person. Um, what is a true trans person? How do you differentiate true trans person from just an AGP or whatever derogatory term they throw around? It's difficult. Some people, if you're on hormones, if you're going through therapy, chemical therapy, HRT, hormone therapy to transition, you may not look enough yet as the opposite sex yet. But that would not necessarily make you a non-true trans person. And one thing I don't like is when somebody said, "Oh, I always felt that I was in the wrong body." Well, that's very vague, especially in scientific circles. What I take from that is that it's vague. Um, when did they begin feeling like they were in the wrong body? Had it truly been at a very young age, or had it been later on in life and that they felt convinced that all along they felt they were in the wrong body? The mind can be fooled in many different ways and build up this belief system about oneself, this self-perception. Um, I think there is I think there is a reason why people with AGP tend to cross-dress or start, if they do transition physically, that it's later in life, because they're later in life, there's a huge life transition. You've gone through school, you identify as a man, there's no problem with that. I still wonder how to differentiate the people who feel that who have, who say that they have gender dysphoria. I mean, what really defines gender dysphoria? I know the simple explanation is that they don't feel they are in the correct body, but that allows room for so many different reasons why they don't feel they're in the right body. It could be from trauma. It could be from, well, okay, two things immediately come to mind. Trauma, particularly at a young age, and two, horrible enforced gender stereotyping. In other words, men play with guns or boys play with guns and they climb trees and so forth, and girls play with little cute dolls and cook and bake. Those are horrible gender stereotypes. Now, okay, if one were to grow up with these gender stereotypes, one could have the feeling that, well, I was a girl, born a girl genetically. but I was interested in riding bikes and climbing trees and so forth. To me, that is healthy. But if you have a reinforced stereotype, you might think, well, because that's a dangerous word, because I like to climb trees and didn't like to do the girly things. Maybe I was not really a girl. Well, this is very important. Listen to this. Um, where in your mind, where in your self, um, are you a member of the opposite sex? Um, I don't necessarily believe in the soul. Where within this is it a brain disorder? Is it? I mean, what differentiates the mind from the brain? If you're really talking about science, if you really want to be concrete and objective in terms of speaking about this, what part of you is a masculine mind in a female body, or vice versa? There's enormous room for subjectivity and being persuaded to think that you should be in a different body or what. Now, I'm proud that I identify as AGP, or at least I identify something close to AGP is something the closest. All right, let me rephrase that. AGP, as described by Dr. Blanchard, is closer to what I feel than homosexual, transsexual. But I don't think even that goes far enough. I came up with about 3 or 4 categories, and there could be some overlap. All right. I have been a cross-dresser proudly, and I know why. And I'm aware, I'm so self-aware of my own motivations and so forth. So I had been comfortable living as a man. I didn't feel any gender dysphoria. And in terms of women and girls, I think that there are some things that are inherently female and some things that are inherently male. Recently, I've been looking a little bit more into testosterone and estrogen. Both sexes have both. It's just a matter of a ratio. Boys have more testosterone and less estrogen, and females have more estrogen naturally and less testosterone. But it's just a difference of this. And I might as well say this, I've heard of some people who identify as, for example, I'll say um, cis male. You know, everybody else is using the term cis male. Cis males who I can't even say cis male. All right, people who were assigned birth. I don't like that term. I have heard that the term assigned, the phrase assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth is actually taken from not the trans category, but from the intersex category. Now, intersex, I hope they don't merge this in. There are some efforts to kind of merge this in. Intersex is something totally different. Intersex is basically hermaphrodite, had been called hermaphrodite before, where you have, literally biologically, you have biological elements of both sexes. It's what I would call a birth defect. It's no disparagement intended. It's simply that you were born with both, and biologically, you should be born with one or the other in order to reproduce. And of course, I don't mean that to mean that anyone who can't like a woman who can't bear children or something, or a man who can't produce the necessary quality. It's not to say that, not to disparage them. I mean, just the literal concept of man and woman is in order to reproduce. Otherwise, our species become extinct. That's not. I don't mean that to mean on an individual, each human basis, individual basis. I just mean collectively as a species. male and female, to reproduce and perpetuate. All right, so that's why I would classify that as a birth defect, intersex, meaning you have elements of both. All right, so if YouTube hasn't taken me down yet, so that's where that term meant. It's assigned by the doctor. Okay, the doctor at birth. Clearly, they're both sets. So the doctor had to make a decision to define the sex of the child and baby, and assigned it a specific gender or sex. But the term has become thrown around and has been used by the trans community. By now, it's basically a given or routine that people tend to use it that way. But from what I've heard and read, it actually comes from intersex. Okay, forget exactly where I was going, but okay, so let me describe these 4 categories, 3 or 4 categories. One of them I feel should have a 4th there are 3, and I sort of feel that there should be a 4th. All right, so I want to throw away, these are my changes, this is my evolution, this is my corollary to Dr. Ray Blanchard. All right, so I'm throwing away the term autogynephilia because it's been so tainted. He described some things that I think match with me. Heterosexual, being attracted to the thought of yourself or fantasizing about yourself as the opposite sex. And autogynephilia would be someone imagining, having a fetish about thinking of oneself as a woman. Autoandrophilia would be the opposite. It would be a woman fantasizing about being a man. Where it separates, where I separate from Dr. Ray Blanchard, is that it must be a fetish. The term fetish, I'm iffy on that, whether it applies or not. I think of it as euphoria. However, it's been characterized with such negative terms, with such negative imagery, as though it's part of pornography, and it's very sexual. It's very it gets weird and icky. I don't think that applies to everybody. I don't think that's the true motivation. I think the true motivation is that you're first of all very. I think I'm going to hazard a guess that AGP people with AGP or tend to be, according to that standard, are very creative and imaginative, and I think it's a hyper heterosexuality to the point of being attracted so much to the visual and the beauty of the opposite sex that they want to embody it within themselves, like become one with it. That's where I am, and they get a euphoria from that. Euphoria does not necessarily link with pornography or sex or sexual gratification or things like that. It could, and I can see how at puberty, if this comes on during puberty, naturally, boys go through puberty and they discover themselves, so to speak, and how to pleasure themselves. And women, I imagine, go through the same thing and they discover how to pleasure themselves. So I can imagine how these other thoughts can come in. But that's not to say that as you grow older and grow up, mature, that aspect, that way of relating to these desires, these urges, manifest themselves, could manifest themselves in different ways. I particularly, of course, went through, as a boy, went through puberty and discovered how to do certain things. Self-pleasure. But I didn't really cross-dress until later on, and that what I was just talking about wasn't the motivation. The motivation was, first of all, the artistic aspect of it, the illusion aspect, like the magician aspect of it, where could I pull a trick off? Sort of like makeup. It's like theatrical. Um, Actually, that's something else I hadn't thought of really. What about the whole range uh, of people who professionally cross dress? Um, there are drag queens and there are female impersonators. Now, within that runs a whole gamut. People tend, I think, when people tend to hear drag queen, they think of weird, elaborate makeup, and to the point where some women can feel offended that they are not really they are not cartoonish characters. I understand that. I totally understand that. Sorry. That's one extreme, artistic extreme. That kind of drag queen is. I'll just call that a drag queen. That is an extreme. The female impersonator tends to impersonate actual celebrities who are women. They are men who are cross-dressing, technically cross-dressing, to try to appear as a certain female celebrity. They are not interested in, or they're not trying to look gawk, I was going to say gawkish, extreme or outlandish. They're trying to look as close to that female celebrity as possible. That's more where I fall in terms of cross-dressing. I wanted to develop the makeup, and I wanted to look as authentic and passable as possible. So I think that AGPs, if I can label that term, use that term, AGPs are more creative, imaginative, and I suspect that they tend to be very visual. Ed Wood Jr., the famous 1950s, I think 60s, director, producer, screenwriter. Look up Tim Burton's movie Ed Wood, and you'll. It's like a mini biopic of him. He is what I would consider a good example of an accurate portrayal of a somebody with AGP. He was attracted to women, but he liked to dress up, cross-dress. So I hope I have. Sorry, the camera freezes sometimes. I hope that I've made this clear that cross-dresser is simply an act. It's not. I don't deem it a category meant to be derogatory or de-elevate somebody, like one person being a true trans and another person not being a true trans. It's simply an activity. The person is motivated by certain reasons to cross-dress. And one person's motivation may not be another person's motivation, but the act is still the same. All right. So Ed Wood cross-dressed clearly. It's a fact. And he was heterosexual. I think he's talked about how the sensuality and the touch, the Angora sweater and so forth, the touch made him feel feminine or comforted him. And there are probably I'm sure there are psychological reasons for that. So let me describe now. But again, I want to say that while I agree, I think those things match myself. The assumed association or presumed association between AGPs and pornography and not being a true trans or whatever, I think is hogwash. And I don't follow that. All right, so these are my proposed 3 or 4 categories. One, I label what I had been labeling as AGP, I now label as fantasy, meaning that looking at examining my own self, what I was motivated by, I think they're heterosexuals. They are so attracted to the opposite sex that they want to feel what it feels like. They're very curious. I know that's what motivated me. I was envious as a child. I felt secure and okay. I did not have gender dysphoria. I felt okay as a boy growing up. Um, but I was envious of certain things that girls could do. Later on, especially when cross dressing, I felt comforted. I felt more beautiful. Um, I felt a euphoria. And please don't take the term euphoria to mean anything sexual necessarily. Euphoria simply meaning a combination of happiness, comfort, um, sort of mind blown, um, and being happy and certain things that you wouldn't get from being, playing a role as a man. Um, that's what I would define as the fantasy. I labeled it fantasy because there's no sense of gender dysphoria. All right. Two, homosexual. There can be some cross-dressing. Some homosexuals may cross-dress, but that's not the inherent motivation. Um, they would tend to be more effeminate just in normal day-to-day life. Whereas I think the fantasy person would not be effeminate. They are more playing a role. I know when I don't consider myself effeminate in my daily life, but when I am dressed up, I I play a role. I enjoy playing the role. I feel some comfort in playing that role, but it is clearly a role. And then there's the fourth type I'll skip the third type because it's vague at this point. The fourth type, what I labeled narcissist, and this I'm sure would have to be ironed out and clarified and probably delineated even further. But in some sense, this is like the junk pile. We know that there are people out there. There are PDF files. I know I said the other term. I'm going to go and edit it. I'm doing this to signal myself, edit that earlier term. Okay, PDF file. There are some that are motivated clearly by other more selfish reasons. Well, not to say that the other reasons are selfish, but other motivations of the other groups aren't selfish, but it's selfish to the point of harming others with no regard to ethics. So there are PDF files, and there's a certain type that I've noticed that seems to be very narcissistic, meaning that they are only concerned about their own well-being at the expense of others' well-being. Other people may feel awkward. I'm still iffy on how this delineates, but there's clearly a category of people who just seem icky. They are not okay. One signal to me anyway is the ones who the cross-dressers. Again, it's just an act. It's just an activity. It doesn't describe the actual motivation. But there are some in the trans community who just they don't shave. They don't take simple steps to look the part. I think there is something more, possibly PDF file ish about them. I think there are ulterior motives, put it that way. Then there's the fourth category, or third category, really. That was the fourth category. Going back to the third category, I wanted to put claim of gender dysphoria, but as I've said earlier in this video, how do you define gender dysphoria? There's such a wide range of reasons for the cause of it. Was it trauma as a child? Was it what made you feel like you were in the wrong body? I'd want to iron that out. So I hope this is clear and this video is clear. I don't want to make my entire channel about this. I do want to talk, I do want to create documentaries. I want to create more documentaries. I have one in mind about the history of Transformers, the toy franchise Transformers, particularly the early evolution. They were imported from Japan. You had Transformers, you had, I want to mention Barbie for a little bit, and G.I. Joe, how they played parts in the early evolution of Transformers, and the converters and the GoBots and so forth, how they were imported from Japan into the United States, what caused it, and so forth. Then Reagan administration, deregulation, how that affected it. I want to do one on that. I want to do one on one of the UFO cases, Betty and Barney Hill case. There are some alternative possible alternative explanations, and I want to explore one of them. I have figured out how to do my documentaries more easily and better. I'm at ease writing a script and reading the script as if it were an audio, but of course, podcast. But of course, that would not play well on YouTube, on a YouTube video. So what I want to do is record my audio, and then finding stock footage is tricky. But some people, I need something visual. Some people have screenshots of themselves playing video games. Other people have other things. I thought about taking a walk in the park, just recording rocks, not trying, well, actually consciously avoiding people's faces, but shots like pans over the lake or pans along the road or something like that, just to give something visual while you hear my voice. And if you don't want to watch me, as fascinating as that is right now, you can just play it and then listen to it. You can even, there are ways of just simply stripping or recording the audio, maybe downloading the audio and just listening to it as a podcast. But I've already established this channel, so I don't want to create something additional. So I thought that would be the best way. But I really want to talk about, I really do want to produce individual videos proposing alternative explanations for some famous cases. Betty and Barney Hill, basically the abduction, some abduction cases. I want to talk about Roswell, things that people don't necessarily know about, that aren't spread, information that isn't spread as widely as it ought to be, as it deserves to be, and some other cases. And I want to, overall, over the course of several videos about UFOs, UFO cases, I want to show how the UFO myth has evolved over time. I also want to talk about the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947, which has been marked as the first modern UFO sighting. That's where the term flying saucer came from. And there's a possible alternative explanation for what he saw. So I want to cover the evolving myth. I don't mean myth in terms of the fact it's wrong or it's incorrect or it's made up. I don't mean that. I mean myth in the sense of Greek myth or Egyptian myth. Something that the collective public builds a narrative around or thought about. And this has evolved. It began with sightings of craft or sightings of weird things in the sky. And then it evolved into people thinking that they were possibly from another planet. And then it evolved into sightings of creatures. And then that's like the 1960s. And then you start getting abduction cases in the 1980s. It reaches enough of the readership population interested in UFOs that collectively the narrative about UFOs becomes more like talking about aliens in UFO or flying saucers or other craft, and that they're abducting people. And then there's also the element of Men in Black. government agents dressed in black who will silence witnesses. I'm not saying that this is actually happening. I'm saying it's fascinating from a sociological point of view to understand, or to read, to learn about how this narrative or this myth has evolved from sightings of craft, and or not even craft, sightings of objects in the sky, all the way to where we are now, which is basically that the craft crash in Roswell or other places, and that the government is covering it up. I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying this is the narrative storyline that many people accept. Crashed, and that there are government agencies that will silence you if you try and speak out, and they're aliens, that some aliens abduct you and do these experiments, and other aliens have ways of curing cancers and stopping wars and so forth. It's fascinating from a psychological, sociological point of view. So that's what I want to cover. So blah, blah, blah. I will talk with you next time. Bye.